Good morning, reproductive class. This is animal science, and we have been talking about reproduction. I know it's been kind of a hassle with switching to online right at the end of the semester, but we got 1 week left. I'll send out a review sheet and the final for you guys to do probably the end of next week. You just need to do it and then submit it back to me through email or through Canvas, whichever is the easiest for you. I'm going to attach a worksheet to the Canvas, and hopefully between my last lecture and this lecture, we can put the two together and you will be able to complete the whole worksheet and get through the process. If not, I will finish it up tomorrow's lecture on Tuesday. So as we look at this slide, we're looking at an ovary. This is a cow's ovary. You can see the follicle there on the top. It is the water blister right here, and that is producing E2, which is estrogen. Estrogen is what makes the animal show the outward signs of heat, standing for the male, so on and so forth. As that follicle gets big, it tells the brain to release GnRH, which triggers an LH surge, which surges right here. And as it surges, it causes ovulation. And with ovulation, we have estrogen dropping. And where they ovulated from, there is a scar. That scar then turns into a corpus luteum, which is the rise of P4 here on the green line, which is progesterone. This is what prepares the cow for pregnancy. Two main structures on the ovary. Make sure you put those in your memory banks, and we will talk more about them later. The stages of the estrus cycle are pretty simple. Proestrus is just where that follicle is starting to be recruited. Estrus is when the follicle is large and producing a lot of E2 or estrogen, which causes the animal to show outward signs of heat or standing for another animal to mount them. Metestrus is the forming of the corpus luteum, so that's right after ovulation. And diestrus is the high progesterone that maintains most of our heat, which we call the luteal phase of their cycle. If they decide there is no pregnancy, then the endometrial layer of the uterus will release prostaglandin, and that prostaglandin will cause the CL to regress, and the cycle will start again. This is a typical cow. If we're looking at these two cows, obviously the one on the bottom is the one in heat. Standing heat means the one that's standing and bracing for another to mount them. This is the same whether we're talking about sheep, pigs, polar bears. Horses are different, however. With horses, we tease them with the stud horse. We see obvious physical signs of that horse being in heat. They're attentive to the male. They will hike their tail. They will wink at them. And you see more peeing and things like that out of our mare. All right, so here's our follicle. Follicle produces estrogen that changes the behavior. It helps for sperm transportation. The corpus luteum is our progesterone-producing body, or P4, prepares the uterus for the embryo or for pregnancy. It creates an uterine milk for that free-floating embryo. It also quiets the uterus from contractions, and it produces a thick progesterone-based plug that blocks the cervix so no foreign material can get in and cause disease or elimination of that pregnancy. So if we're going to talk about the hormone or the endocrinology system in the animal in terms of the reproductive process, we have to start at the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is up in the brain, so we talk about it as getting feedback from the body into the brain so that we can cause this animal to show signs of heat and work with uterus. So the hypothalamus releases a hormone called GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone. This comes from the pituitary, and it comes from the hypothalamus and goes to the pituitary. The pituitary gland has two main hormones when we're dealing with reproduction. There's a lot of hormones in the pituitary gland, but two main ones that will be released. So depending on the concentration of GnRH coming from the hypothalamus will determine whether we release FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, or LH, luteinizing hormone. So let's just say we are starting the first cycle of a heifer that just hit puberty. So the hypothalamus releases GnRH, which triggers the pituitary to release FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. This FSH from the pituitary here goes and triggers the ovary to recruit follicles. This recruiting of follicles creates some follicles that start growing. As these follicles start growing, estrogen rises. As estrogen starts to rise, this heifer will start to show outward signs of heat, meaning that she will start being more agitated. She'll start mooing more. She will probably have a little bit of a clear mucus discharge. You'll see her more interested in other animals, and then you'll see animals riding her, and she will stand and brace for them to ride her. Once she stands and braces for them to ride her, she is in main part of her heat. She has a Graafian follicle on her ovary, and it is getting ready to ovulate. So, like I said, with the hypothalamus being up in the brain, when we have high estrogen, which is in the bloodstream, and it triggers back to the brain will then say, hey, we have too much estrogen. We need to ovulate that follicle and decrease the estrogen level. So the brain releases another GnRH surge that is more concentrated, and it triggers LH release. LH is luteinizing hormone, and this luteinizing hormone targets the ovary and causes ovulation. When we get ovulation, that egg that was housed in the follicle is then released. It's caught by the infundibulum, which is part of the fallopian tube or the oviduct, and it's funneled into the oviduct. Fertilization takes place in the middle of the oviduct at the ampulla-isthmus junction. Okay, so once this egg has been released and it's funneled into the oviduct and it's on its way to the ampulla-isthmus junction, we have a decline in E2. We also have a scar where this follicle erupted. And that scar then starts to heal, and it forms this big zit on the ovary. That big zit is the corpus luteum, which starts producing progesterone. And remember, progesterone is what prepares the uterus for pregnancy. It blocks the cervix. It does all of these things to make sure that this pregnancy is safe. So the sperm cells get there. They fertilize the egg. The egg continues on down the oviduct to the uterine horn. When it gets to the uterine horn, it's floating around in there in a comfortable environment because the progesterone has prepared the uterus for this embryo to be there. Let's say something happens, the cow gets really stressed, you did something to her, and she doesn't end up becoming pregnant. The first place that knows whether she's pregnant or not is the uterus. The most internal layer of the uterus is called the endometrial layer of the uterus. If it does not detect implantation from this embryo within 18 days, 20 days, somewhere in that ballpark, this uterus releases a hormone called prostaglandin, PGF2 alpha. And this prostaglandin actually causes that CL to die or to regress. And when it dies and regresses, P4, progesterone, decreases. And the brain says, wow, we got a decrease in progesterone. We need to start a new cycle. So the hypothalamus releases GnRH, which triggers the pituitary. FSH is released to the ovary. A new follicle grows. As it gets bigger, she comes into heat. When she comes into heat, it's high estrogen, tells the brain, hey, we got too much estrogen. The brain then says, all right, here's LH. LH causes ovulation. The egg is caught and funneled into the oviduct where fertilization can happen. And then a CL grows in its place. The progesterone is there to help prepare the uterus and keep the pregnancy safe and healthy. Simple story. Make sure you pay attention to that because it is on your worksheet. You have to explain that story to me. Hopefully you got it. Here's just another look at it. Endocrine control. Hypothalamus releases GnRH. Pituitary is LH and FSH, just like we talked about. The ovary receives the FSH, grows a new follicle. The follicle produces estrogen. Estrogen causes the cow to show outward signs of heat. With outward signs of heat, we have a lot of estrogen. The brain says too much estrogen. It sends out LH. LH then causes ovulation, where then a CL grows where the follicle was, and we have progesterone that helps maintain the pregnancy. Hopefully that made sense. We're going to skip over the bull for a second here. I'll come back to him in a little bit. We're going to roll right by this old bull. Not particularly concerned. Fertilization takes place in the oviduct at the ampulla-isthmus junction. Typically, if we are doing AI, artificial insemination, when that cow is in standing heat, we will wait 12 hours to actually breed through artificial insemination, because we are going to actually take and put the semen into the uterus, where when the bull breeds, he breeds in the vaginal canal, and those semen cells have to then swim through the cervix, the uterus, uterine horn, to the oviduct. We give them a big head start, so we give it about 12 hours ahead after they're in heat before we breed them, unlike the bull. These are some embryos. You can see the zygote. That's first fertilization, and then as it grows, we have 2 cells. It goes to 4 cells, 8 cells, 16 cells, 32 cells, so on and so forth. You do the math, it just keeps doubling. Alright, hopefully this made some sense. I'm going to reserve some of this stuff for tomorrow. Remember, as we're doing this, if we are letting the bull breed, the bull is going to cover that cow more times than we are through AI with more semen cells. His conception rate on one-time service on a cow is about 70%. If I heat detect and I breed a cow AI, my conception rate is about, you guessed it, 70%. So it's very similar. The one advantage the bull has in terms of getting conception and cows bred is he is a relentless heat checker. He checks for heats 24 hours a day, where I don't. So there are some differences in terms of those kind of things. So hopefully this gave you a little bit of insight on some of the endocrinology and how that reproductive system works. If you have questions, feel free to email me, text me, do whatever it takes to get that information. You can even contact me through Canvas if you want. You have both of my contacts in terms of my email and my text messages. Remember, it's almost the end of the semester. We only got a few more things to go through. Make sure you stay on top of it. Nobody wants to teach or learn online, but we're stuck with it for these last 2 weeks. Looks like we're going to be back to normal in the spring, or as close to normal as we possibly can. We keep hoping for a vaccine. It's supposed to be out this week. So if you're old, a healthcare worker, you could get in line to get this vaccine for COVID in the next week or 2. Anyway, good luck. Have fun. Hope you had a great holiday. Talk to you later.